So I drove 4 hours to spend 4 hours on a dumpster fire of a podcast.
Bruh. Oh, I love it. I love Jesus. Oh my gosh. So cool. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, and also welcome if you are new. I'm so grateful to have you all here. So my name is Akua B, and here on this channel I cover all things faith, culture and encouragement, and today we've got another reaction. I'm so excited to get into this. It's a video from a YouTuber called Ruslan, and he's also a Christian creator, and in this video he's going to be reacting to / analysing a podcast that he was on called the Whatever Podcast, and this is all happening in the US. So in the UK, I feel like the podcast game is not as strong just yet. In America, I feel like it's blown up so massively, and we're kind of piggybacking on top of what the US is doing as per usual. But they usually make things trendy and hot, so we're like, yeah, let's get on that train. So this podcast, for me, these kind of podcasts, I do try not to watch them because I think the pool of podcasting has just become so saturated, and if you're not careful you'll end up listening to information that you just don't need to hear, information that is irrelevant to your life, information that is damaging to your life, or just pure toxic information. And there are some good podcasts out there. There's some great podcasts in this whole manosphere and like red pill and, you know, feminism and femininity podcasts, but I think just the market for them is quite saturated right now because everyone is trying to establish a podcasting platform. So this platform is the Whatever Podcast, and it's not a Christian podcast. It's one of these kind of red pilly shows, and I think the standard for this, like the tick box, is have some guys as the presenter or something like that, and then have a bunch of women and just basically like grill them about their career, their choices, relationship choices, etc., about their personal preferences, about their personal lives. So it's basically inviting a bunch of people on to expose them, to kind of create that buzz around the podcast. And I think that's part of the reason why I don't really want to watch them, why I'm not invested in them, because there's so much like shock value and it's just a bit too much for me. So it'll be interesting to see how Ruslan, who's a Christian content creator, will go onto this platform and then have hopefully some kind of fruitful discussions and conversations through this podcast. I've never listened to this podcast, the Whatever Podcast, myself, but so this is going to be my first time kind of hearing this. I think I've listened to a previous segment that had Lila Rose on it, who is like quite a prominent pro-life activist. So it'll be interesting to watch like this whole segment for the first time with Ruslan on it, and seeing someone's different perspective. So I'm quite interested to watch. So without further ado, if you haven't already, give this video a like, comment something that you've learned or something that you're enjoying about the video, and subscribe to stick around and click that notification bell so that you never miss out on a new upload. And let's get straight into the reaction.
I'm just perplexed. I'm just perplexed by the motivation.
Basically, just like it's fun. Like I look at my calendar and we're hooking up with a couple of chicks that day, and I'm like, oh wow, what a great Wednesday.
Man, there's just some podcasts most Christians avoid, whether it's because of their content or extremely thirst-trappy thumbnails. Some of these thumbnails are things that would cause most people to just completely abandon the internet. But one of the podcasts most notable and rising through the ranks in this specific niche is the Whatever Podcast. Now, you may have seen what's been going on with Adam22 and his wife. If you haven't, very happy for you. Please don't Google it. But the Whatever Podcast just decided to have Adam22 and his wife on, and my friend Lila Rose was able to loop yours truly into the process. So I drove 4 hours to spend 4 hours on a dumpster fire of a podcast.
Bruh. Not a dumpster fire. I feel like this is what I'm talking about. I don't know, there's just a certain undertone, especially as a Christian. You've really got to be mindful about what you watch. And I remember there was a time when people like Kevin Samuels were so big, and I used to like watch him for a bit of entertainment here and there, and I came to a point where I was like, why am I watching this? Like, what is this actually adding to my life? And I think it was just entertainment at the time. I wasn't genuinely embracing anything that he was saying, but I think you could get to that point. What you're listening to, what you're watching is influencing you, and you've got to realize it for what it is. If it's not teaching good things, then it's not great. It's not good for you.
And then drove 4 hours back, which leads many to my audience here asking, Ruslan, why would you appear on such a podcast? Some people may even be thinking that me appearing on a podcast like this could bring some of my audience over and potentially cause them to stumble. Some may even think that Christians even being involved in cultural hot topics like this is just not something we should be doing, as if it's beneath us somehow. And listen, I'm going to unpack all of that and give you guys my reasons with a specific Bible passage on why I decided to appear on this podcast. But first, let me give you some of the highlights from this conversation we had.
I think that's so interesting as well, because I think the space that I'm going into now is very much so trying to see the connections and the bridges between Christianity and culture, because I feel like there's such a gap at times. We think that you can't be cultured and like have basically the whole scripture of being in the world and not of the world. I think Christians do struggle with that. So you're either on one extreme. I've seen Christians that just hang out with Christians and they have no idea what's going on in the world on a cultural level. But then you have the Christians that are so lukewarm that they have no boundaries and very led by the world and what's going on, to the point where people would be surprised to find out they're a Christian. So I think there's definitely somewhere in the middle. You've got to strike a balance between being a true follower of Christ and being on fire for him, but also being in touch and being able to relate to the world so you can actually reach them. So I do actually applaud Ruslan for going on this podcast, and I think people who are coming against him to say, why is he even appearing on this podcast? It's out of a heart of compassion, I'm sure, because if you're a Christian, if you're a true follower of Christ, you have a burden on your heart for those who are not yet saved, who don't yet know the joy and the love of Christ and the forgiveness of Christ. Like, it's so important for us to still have that weight on us, that burden, that compassion for other people that don't yet have Christ as we do. And I think I just applaud him for going on it. And I think that he's doing an amazing thing. And the more we make these bridges, the more we'll see people actually take a closer look at Jesus for themselves.
Like, the argument against people engaging in sort of non-traditional relationships is kind of weak if you have to instantly pivot into like, well, what about the kids?
Yeah, I think there's a design of how we were created to function in a one man, one woman covenantal arrangement. Now, I think everything outside of that is unhelpful. Mm-hmm. And I think there is something wrong with, and I think porn is a total net negative to society. I'm not sure how many of you guys is like fans that watch you regularly, you've met in person. And how this affects them. But I mean, Andrew Huberman did a whole long thing about what happens when someone consumes. They open up a feedback loop that's intended to be consumed with someone else. Okay,
so I think the people who are on this podcast right now are OnlyFans models. I don't know if you call it that, but they're people who have OnlyFans accounts and things like that. So OnlyFans, if you don't know what it is, I'm pretty sure it's some kind of service that you do something, or you perform for a private audience and you pay a subscription or pay, I don't know guys, I'm so sorry, I'm out of the loop with OnlyFans, but basically it's a platform where you get paid for doing something. So it's a pay for like service online, and these women do that in more of a provocative sense. Maybe they have some kind of channel where it's about their body. So I think that's what he's speaking to right now. I was a bit confused for a second. I was like, what? But I think it's their OnlyFans models.
I think it's very hard to make the argument that it's helping people as much as it's harming people. It's keeping a lot of these guys regressed. It's keeping, I mean, the incel community, the red pill stuff. A lot of the people that rail against you guys probably secretly go and watch this stuff, which is a really bizarre thing. We've seen it with the fresh and fit girls. So I don't know if, as a net positive, this is something, remove the kids. Like, this is something that you think is actually adding to human flourishing.
Everyone tries to always focus on like the extreme watcher, but I think that there's like very healthy consumers, which are probably the majority with consumption. And like, I don't think that like women consume too, and I don't think they're sitting around all day just I mean, we both.
There's so many bleeps in this. Like, where's the conversation?
You guys created, so it's a bit different.
Why we feel comfortable doing it again, even after having been so massively in the news over the past couple months. You know?
Adam, you don't see the increase in opening your relationship up to risk, though. We're just giving you statistics. 90% of relationships, you guys are functionally in a non-monogamous relationship, even though privately you may not be. It seems like you guys have something special, and it seems like you guys have a child and a beautiful family. You decided to get married. You decided to say the vows, and it seems like there's this roaring going on inside of you guys where you have certain values and you have certain things that you want for your kids in this unit. Yet at the same time, I'm just perplexed by the motivation.
I don't see those things to be contradictory. That we want to have a great life for our kids and stuff, and then we also are willing to, do.
I'm talking about for your own union. Like it seems like this increases the likelihood of this potentially ending, which I don't want for you guys.
We've never really discussed it in those terms. I don't think of it that way, and I think if anything, it kind of made our sex life a little bit more exciting for a period of time. Just the fact that I had a little bit of competition, a little bit more of a reason to go hard.
What? I don't think they're a Christian couple. I think what Ruslan is speaking to is their values in terms of having this locked-in relationship, having kids, and then what I'm inferring from this conversation is that they have some kind of open relationship publicly, and that's what they espouse, that's what they say that they're doing, and they're enjoying it, etc. That's so interesting, and I'm so glad that Ruslan and Lila are there to speak into that, because from a Christian perspective, we know that if you're actively participating in this kind of situation, it's not fruitful ultimately. That's why God tells us, he commands us that a man should leave his family and cleave to his woman, and it's just one man, one woman, get married, go about your business, become one flesh. Because when you start involving multiple people, it's no longer a marriage that is sanctified. That's no longer under that covenant. You've made it something different. So yeah, I guess he's trying to speak into why would you have these values? Why would you want to get married, have the kids, do all of this, but then you still have this open relationship persona online, or you live that. So I think Adam 22 is trying to explain that it's not a contradiction in their eyes.
All right, it's official. Took some work, took some maneuvering, but we are now offering a virtual ticket to our live podcast event happening August 26th in Oceanside. So if you can't make it to Oceanside, if you're not from Southern California, go to RuslanLive.com to get your virtual ticket to join us live while we'll be streaming the event to all you guys watching who can't be here with us in person. What if the very things that Christian culture often dismisses as worldly actually aren't bad desires? What do I mean by that? It's obvious that the world values things like money, fitness, fame, and immediate gratification. But I like to propose that those natural human desires can actually be redirected with God's words and God's ways of doing things in order to bring glory to Him and serve our neighbor on this side of eternity. And I like to call this very concept God-driven ambition. And we'll be unpacking all of this at my very first live podcast in-person gathering happening August 26th in Oceanside, California. We'll have God Logic Apologetics, Pastor Jeff Moores from Rhythm Church, John Keith, Trizzle Fitness, and hosted by my guy Ray Rock. Lock it in on your calendars right now. Saturday, August 26th in Oceanside, California at Rhythm Church. Click the button down below or go to RuslanLive.com to get more information and get your ticket now.
And I don't necessarily think that's the worst thing.
There's a freedom inside of a covenantal relationship to try things and to explore and to do things that if you're out here and you're raw dogging it, you don't know who has what and all the stipulations that go into that life, there's a freedom you have, there's a protection you have, there's a trust that you have in a relationship where it's just you and the other person.
And that's why I do think that the sexual revolution has overall been probably negative for most women, because the truth is that as a man, you can have sex with any woman and, bust it in 5-10 minutes and you're good, you just had a good time. Whereas for a woman, realistically, the first time you have sex with a guy, you have like an infinitesimal percentage chance that you're going to, and you're realistically only going to end up having positive experiences by sleeping with the same guy over and over and really learning how to connect with him.
It's called marriage.
Totally, and I get that. I also just think women, should feel free to do what they want to do, but I also in terms of what I would tell, any woman in my life, what I would recommend for them, I would say, hold your in high esteem.
Porn aside, if my daughter was like wanted to explore her, like I
think it's interesting what they're saying, and they've come to an agreement on that it's important to protect your body, protect that sexual side of you, because it does open up problems. So yeah, I agree with that as well. Like, it's probably one of the more core central ethics of Christianity. Like, this is what we do with our body. Like, it's not just like a mental thing. We have a mental belief and we follow this, but we also follow it with our body. We reverence God with our body. It's called a living sacrifice, our body, and it's the temple of the Holy Spirit. So it's that reverence for that that I really appreciate hearing both of them come to an agreement on. But I think also the way that he was talking about the differences between men and women, yes, I'm sure women have, we always talk about this, and I think it's a bit of a false narrative that we keep repeating, that women are so much more affected by life in general. Like, we're so much more hyper emotional than men, and I think they're talking about that in a sexual way as well, that sexual experiences damage women more, and that might be true, but I think that it always minimizes in these conversations the impact that it also has on men. And God doesn't just tell women in the Bible to reverence your body and do all of this stuff and reverence it as a living sacrifice and reverence it as the temple of the Holy Spirit, but he says it's a non-gendered, non-sex specific commandment about the preservation of our body, about honoring it, about honoring God with our body. So I think those conversations can sometimes be misconstrued to say that women are more affected than these things than men, and therefore men can do these things and not suffer the same consequences or suffer less impact from doing these things and being promiscuous and things like that. So there is, saying all that to say, there is a serious and deep consequence for going outside of God's order for things, and it can be really hurtful for men just as much as women. And that is why God tells us, your body's sacred, like, honor him with it and wait till that marriage covenant to be able to explore that freely, because anything outside of that will hurt you. And not to say that marriage will be perfect, but it considerably reduces.
I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, I don't think that's unethical.
But you guys just both acknowledge you wouldn't want your daughter to do that.
It wouldn't be
It's
my
not my
ideal
first choice,
thing.
but
So
it's
isn't that a
also-
bit inconsistent, though, to create something that you wouldn't want your offspring? Like, we want our kids to be better than us, so why would you want them to do that? Like, if they're aspiring for you
I feel
to.
like what I'm doing allows my daughter to have a better life. Like, we're going to be able to, like, put her through private school because I have the life that I have now. Like, I wouldn't have been able to give her that without that.
My dad was a social worker, and for sure he wanted me to be something bigger and better than a social worker. It's like you always want your kid to do better than you would want to do. I would love if my daughter was, some famed, artist or something. That would be amazing. Do I necessarily think that that's in the cards? I mean, that's kind of a roll of the dice. You never know what your kid's going to get.
How much is enough? Like, financially, like, at what point is it just like you I feel like you guys intrinsically know this isn't helpful.
No, I think it's as long as you're having fun. Like,
Yeah.
whenever we go and
But is there
porn in
dollar
a day,
amount?
it's like
No, it's not a dollar
it's basically just like it's fun. Like, I look at my calendar and we're hooking up with a couple of chicks that day, and I'm like, oh wow, what a great Wednesday. It's like very
it's
profitable
if
and
it didn't
fun.
feel good anymore. Like,
Yeah.
there are
I mean,
times
math feels good.
like, sometimes we have more on camera than we do off camera, and those weeks I don't feel like as connected to them. I'm like, wow, we've just been working so much. Like, I don't feel like we've been fostering a relationship, and in those weeks,
I think they actually do full on, like, stuff. That's okay. Like, it is really sad actually having to hear this, that their best experience of life is what makes them feel good, because what feels good will not last forever. And I think there's kind of a hedonistic perspective. Like, it's very me-centered. Whatever pleases me, whatever makes me feel better, whatever, serves me. And ultimately, that will fall apart because the only one that was meant to ever be served is God. So that will eventually crumble, even if it hasn't already. So it'll be interesting to see the follow-up from this conversation. But yeah, it's interesting to hear that that's their perspective of living a good life, as long as it makes them feel good and serves them.
Weeks, if like we didn't take that break and that pause and talk about it and reconnect, then I could see myself being like, I don't want to do this anymore because it's interfering with our relationship.
And it does feel good, but the downside of meth is much worse.
Do you think there's any
having actually done it, it's not that great. Whereas the downside of having, with some girl on camera is that at the end of the money, you get a bunch of money in the mail. So to me,
it's
very different.
You guys don't know potential consequences down the road.
I mean, we've been doing it for a long time, and I wouldn't really say that we've encountered many negative consequences from it. Just a bunch of fun and casual.
And those weren't even the best moments, in my opinion. The best moment in this conversation, I'm going to save till the end. But first, I wanted to share what this reminded me of. Back in November, I had the amazing opportunity of going to Israel for the very first time. And I got to go to the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus launches into his public ministry. I got to experience the layout of Israel and get a newfound respect of how far Jesus' hometown Nazareth is to the city of Galilee, a small port city where many of the disciples were actually fishermen. And it is here that Jesus encounters them, and he's engaging with them, and he's telling them that he's going to make them fishers of men. In Matthew 5, verse 13, Jesus tells the crowd, "You are the salt of the earth. But what good is salt if it lost its flavor? Can you make it salty again? It will be thrown out and trampled underfoot as worthless." Having the opportunity to go to Israel, and specifically Galilee, where a lot of these folks were fishermen, I got to understand the purpose of salt. And salt, in this context, did two things. One, it was before they had vehicles, Amazon Prime. So the salt was there to preserve the fish so that it wouldn't go rotten. And another purpose for salt was to also add flavor to the fish. So when we read this verse of Jesus telling his followers that they are the salt of the earth, it may lose some cultural meaning to us, but what he's really saying is that you are the type of people, disciples, who are here to preserve things and here to add flavor. And so if we don't go into these places and have these conversations and present the truth and add flavor and attempt to preserve goodness, who will? So driving up to the Whatever podcast, I knew that that was my heart for everyone in that room. I know that this was going to be my mission, to be like Jesus, to present both grace and truth, to be the salt of the earth, to ultimately be a vessel to plant seeds and ultimately point people to Jesus. The people in the room and the over 5,000 people that were watching live. And that is what led to what I think is this best moment.
Isn't that, oh, I love it. I love Jesus. Oh my gosh. So cool. I just love it. I love to see people's heart for the gospel, heart for people. It's just, it's so amazing. And it's so true. Like, it's a domino effect. People in that room are being affected by you being salt. People who are watching live are being affected by you being salt. People who are in the room with the people that are watching are being affected by you being salt. And then maybe the next day they're like, oh, I was watching this podcast, or my friend was watching this podcast while she was cooking and I overheard it. Like, we don't know the impacts that we have when we just take that step of faith and we take that courageous step to be bold for Christ, because we are the people that God is working through to make himself known. Like, if we don't do it, if the Christians aren't bold, who's gonna do it? Like, who is gonna do it? I'm so, just so pumped by this video. I'm so happy and like excited to see this clip as well, like what he thinks is the best moment, because I think he's had some pretty good combo so far. And asked a lot of probing but good questions as well to make people really think.
This beautiful picture of this acceptance in a marriage, and also desiring to take care of yourself for your partner, to serve your partner, right? And I've been with my wife 15 years. We've both been overweight. I've been obese. She's had kids. We're in better shape now. We're lean. It's something that's a value of ours. My question would just simply be, it seems like we've all tried all of these things. We've tried all of these ideologies and all these puzzles that we have to piece together. Have you guys ever genuinely considered, like, trying Jesus, repenting of your sin, and really applying God's wisdom for your life? And that's not just
not so much.
I'm genuinely asking. You're Armenian. Our people have a beautiful, rich history. We're the first Armenian nation. We didn't have a written language until we translated the Bible into a written language. We have an amazing, rich, the most persecuted church, right? So like genuinely, like it seems like we've tried all these other things. We've tried doing our
It's the deep questions. It's the deep questions. I love it.
We're trying all this idea, trying all these. Where's the line? And have we genuinely ever looked at the scriptures and considered that maybe Jesus is who he says he is? Maybe he is God. Maybe he's not a liar. Maybe he's not a lunatic. Maybe he's not a good prophet. And genuinely repented of our ways and tried it God's way.
I 1,000% believe in God and Jesus and know all of that.
That wasn't what I asked.
But you don't understand my point of view.
Like, what would happen if all of society actually implemented the wisdom of God? Like, genuine question. If people waited until marriage just to have...
Truthfully, you're asking me about religion?
Specifically about Jesus.
About
and
Jesus?
Hinging your faith on the resurrection of Jesus.
It's interesting because this is such a common thing. As soon as people hear anything about religion, about, they can switch off. And I think that's why, I'm not really sure who the presenter of the show is, but I think that's why the presenter, the guy sat with the board in front of him, said, "You're asking me a question about religion." And I think it's because people can switch off, or they can have a volatile reaction to it. And I think I was definitely the same when I was younger and I wasn't Christian. Like, if anyone was like, if I heard the street preacher on the street, I would be so turned off. I'd be like, why are you so loud? Like, turn it down. And I think that there's certain markers that when Christians talk about their faith, that people can either alert to and like they rise to it and they want to have dialogue with it, either in a positive way, a constructive way, or in a quite aggressive way. Or there's that kind of switch off that happens when people are like, oh, you want to ask about like religion. So I'd be interested to see what people say about whether they've genuinely tried to do that or if they're open to it.
I know that.
And living your life his way.
I'm a man of God. That's all
I'm
I can
a
say.
woman of God.
Yeah, I think I'll just leave it at that.
Personally, I've done quite a bit of research and digging and trying to convince myself that Jesus was a real person or that I should be invested in his teachings. Haven't really been too convinced, so I'm still kind of waiting to be convinced that this is something I should put my energy into. The vast majority of thinkers that I respect or read or listen to are atheists. So for me personally, it's not really an issue. Like, there's just not enough evidence to me that there's anything of value to offer from Christianity. It's like, realistically, probably the best thing that you could do is like fall in love, get into a relationship with a girl, get married, split your expenses, have a family, etc. once you feel comfortable financially. But like, we just live in a society where we're constantly surrounded by people who are putting on examples of doing the other thing, which is basically like mindlessly chasing and highs and money or whatever for your whole life. And that is kind of like a weird thing that the manosphere has to sort of...
But that's what he said. It's interesting because that's what he said, he and his partner said earlier, like, we do what makes us feel good, and there's not a price tag to that, there's not a dollar amount. So it's interesting that he's saying that about the more negative side of society, but that's what he was saying that he espoused earlier about that kind of hedonistic lifestyle. Also, I think it was interesting about the fact that he was saying, I've done my research, but I'm still waiting to be convinced. I think that's a perspective that a lot of us have or had. If you're Christian watching this, you might be able to relate to this, because I definitely can, feeling like, oh, if God is real, he'll make it known. But if something is big, I think as humans, no matter what religion or like background you have, the question of death is universal. There's not one culture that doesn't have some kind of ideology around death, whether that's a folk tale or it's a religion, or whether it's a tale that's been passed down through your family, through generations. Like, there's so many stories and ideologies and concepts about death that I think it's worth looking into, even if you think that there's nothing out there. Why are you so sure that there's nothing out there? How are you so convinced about the nothingness? Because I get it, you can't really picture without any kind of structure behind it what an afterlife would look like. You'd have to just pull something out of nothing, which is impossible. Apart from God being able to do that, we can't pull eternity out of our own brain. It just can't comprehend it. So with something as weighty as this, I think it's so important to thoroughly do the research. It's not like, you know, what should I eat on the menu this evening, and you've not researched it before you get there. Like this, when death comes, there's no deciding once you get there where you go. You've got to think about it beforehand. So yeah, that is quite interesting that his response. I want to see the lady's response as well.
Reckon with, which is that somebody like Andrew Tate being like at the forefront of the manosphere now, it's like you can't really necessarily just be pushing an agenda of like, yo, as many girls as possible, because Andrew Tate is out here saying like, no, that is not going to make you happy in the long run. And anyone who's really being honest with you is going to let you know that's not going to make you happy in the long run.
That was very profound. And I think what we're saying is, statistically speaking, the majority of men and women will have kids. What is the optimal way to build a family? If we're talking about dating, we're talking about relationships, what is the optimal way to cause the most amount of flourishing to the most amount of people? And what has worked through and through all these civilizations? I think that's the crux of what we're getting on. So what you're saying is totally spot on. And it's not red pill, blue pill to me. There's a lot of goofy things from both sides, a lot of nonsense being said. But if we're talking about the optimal flourishing environments, because we're all going to eventually have kids, majority of us anyway, how does that look? Listen, I totally understand that these environments are not for everybody. But if you want to see a time where I got to go on to Valuetainment and share the gospel with a different OnlyFans model, check this video out here.
Okay, so that is the end of that reaction. It was a really good conversation, actually. I was really thoroughly impressed by it. I was just also impressed by the fact that Ruslan actually had that conversation. He consistently explained himself, even though I don't really think he had to, but I'm sure a lot of people were probably upset or have been upset about the conversations that he's had with people in the past. But I think he asked a lot of good questions, he probed a lot, and he really didn't back down. He wasn't meek about it. He was very, you know, sturdy in his faith, gave examples about him and his wife, about the struggles they'd been through, and, you know, how their faith has kept them going, and it's really stood the test of time. It's not something that they've flaked on or anything like that. Like, it's something that has preserved them and their relationship. So yeah, I really thought this interview was so cool, and I hope to react to more stuff like this about, you know, Christianity and culture, and just hear more conversations like this. I know that Ruslan does a lot of this on his channel, but I've not reacted to them. I've just watched them in my spare time, in my personal time. So if you'd like me to react to more videos on culture, maybe street preaching and how people respond to that, and maybe my 2 cents putting in there, then please make sure to let me know. And if you've enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like down below, and also comment something that you've enjoyed, or throw in your 2 cents, and subscribe to this channel if you have not already. And I'll catch you in my next one. Stay blessed, and bye.